everyone, and welcome to OTrain's Lunch and Learn series. Today we have a very special guest, Angela McNamee from Wise Therapy, who will be talking to us about 4 strategies to reducing the risk of and preventing injuries in the workplace. Now, this may seem upfront like a very dry topic, but if you're in business and you have employees, then this is a must-watch video because it is just so important. The statistics are scary, especially in Australia, and we'll go over all that for you. So to kick it off today, this is an interactive session. So if you're watching via our website, then there is a Q&A box down the bottom. If you're here live, then type in your name, we'll give you a shout out. And if you have any questions throughout the session today, then please ask them, and I'll interrupt Angela and Shane, and we will ask them the questions then. So Shane, would you mind giving us an update on everything OTrain?
Thanks, Emma, and hi everybody. We've had a crazy month yet again, gearing up for the Christmas shutdown. Just pure madness. A couple of new clients come on board, and a couple of clients extending their training rooms and relationships. So, look, nothing specific. Our version 2 rollout is going very well. We've added live chat to our website too. So if anybody wants to drop by and have a chat to Christine or Talal, they'll tell you all about OTrain and how wonderful everything is. So
what's the website there, Shane?
www.otrain.com.au.
Excellent. Now, just a couple of shout-outs to those that are watching live. Hi, Bill. Hi, Anna. And hi, Stephen. So thanks so much for joining us live, and we hope to bring you a really good lunch and learn session. So now on to our very special guest. Welcome, Angela McNamee.
Thank you.
Now, Angela, we've had a couple of chats about the topic already, but would you mind, before we get into the nuts and bolts, telling us a little bit about yourself and Wise Therapy and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an occupational therapist, and for the last 15 years I've been working in the area of workplace health and safety and workplace rehabilitation. We're based in Toowoomba. Our head office is in Toowoomba, but we travel around most of Queensland, so Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, and the Surat Basin area in the last couple of years. So really our job is to help employers try and reduce injuries in the workplace, and then if injuries occur, trying to help people get back to work as soon as possible to reduce the cost to employers.
And what sort of costs are we looking at for employers? Like if we're looking at worst case scenario, what's some of the things that you've seen happening out in the marketplace?
It ranges, and obviously within each state the workers' compensation systems are very different, but within all the systems it can be very expensive for an employer if someone is actually injured at work, particularly if they sustain a serious injury. And the other thing is just loss of productivity when someone with experience goes off work and you're needing to replace people and make up for those people being away. So legal claims can be in the vicinity of a few $100,000 if they are a serious injury. So they can certainly be an expensive factor for employers.
And it's certainly a drain from an employer perspective, which is why we're really excited about having you talk about these 4 key strategies to preventing injury in the workplace. I mean, that's an investment that people make in yourself so that they don't have to deal with people being away and having to rehabilitate and all that sort of stuff. So let's get stuck into it. Actually, first of all, I might just ask Shane, if you're still connected, Shane, what's been your experience with preventing injury in the workplace with all of the employers that you've dealt with over the years?
I guess we've employed a lot of people and we've worked with a lot of employers, but all of the stuff around safety, we get caught in legislation and we get caught in getting sued and workers' comp and all those sorts of things, and it probably is the thing that's forefront of the mind when we talk about safety. But for me, I think about safety and safety prevention about sending my employees home every day as they arrived in the morning. The workers' comp, the fines, the penalties, all those things are one thing. But for me, to look someone's partner, or in one case we had a gentleman who nearly died on site, and 18-year-old, and I had to tell his mother what had happened, and then work with him for nearly 2 years to get him back, not even to his original condition. So to live through that, for me, it's
looks like Shane's just dropped out there a bit.
The human impact than the legislative requirement or the financial impact. And just being conscious.
You're right, Shane, you're back now, you've caught up.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure what we got to. As I said, for me it's the human impact. It's not the legislative requirement or the financial impact. It's the people involved.
Exactly. That's the humanity side of things, of being able to prevent injury in the workplace, is certainly over and above all the other things that we could talk about today. So I'm very happy to have Angela on with us today to talk about just 4 key strategies on how to prevent injury. So let's get stuck into that. So Angela, you've come up with 4 very interesting strategies and from what I've read, very easy to implement strategies. So would you mind sharing the first one with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just quickly touching on what Shane said, I would agree with that. I think too many employers these days see workplace health and safety as a bit of a chore, and they just tick the boxes to meet the legislation requirements, but they don't really think about the fact that there are some simple practical ways to keep their employees safe and happy in the workplace. So I agree that the message needs to be about thinking about the person rather than the overall cost of it, and rather than just ticking the box to meet the requirements. So I guess looking at the 4 strategies, there's an overall system that I think needs to be put in place, and one of them is to actually know all the jobs in the workplace, so to assess every job in a lot of detail, to have a thorough understanding of every single job and the physical requirements of that particular job. And to me, I see that as the background of everything, and a lot of employers feel they do that, but they don't do it in enough detail to actually get a proper picture of each job that people are required to perform. So I think that's the background before you can even look at the 4 strategies.
Absolutely. It's amazing how many people, even just from a HR perspective, don't even have job descriptions. And I mean, if you don't have job descriptions, I can't imagine that they would know exactly what that worker does to be able to assess the risk. Have you come across that?
Oh, absolutely, and even people, if they do put the physical requirements in, one that we had recently was a scraper operator, and they said they needed to sit all day and operate hand controls, but once we broke it down into the fact they also have to service that and lift 20-litre drums of oil, and they have to be leaning over doing maintenance on the machine and squatting down for long periods, checking different parts of the machine. There's a lot more physically involved than what the employer had initially thought about. Certainly in Queensland at the moment, they've just changed the legislation, and employers are now able to ask employees if they have any injuries that may prevent them from doing a particular job. But before they can ask that, they have to give a really detailed description of what the actual job is. So I think it's important for employers to really break it down into very specific detail for each job.
So where do you come into it then, Angela? Do you come into it before the job description's written, or do you come into it afterwards to do assessments? And we'll go into the assessments that you do and recommend, but at what stage do you come into it?
I guess we come in right from the start at actually assessing that job, and as occupational therapists, that's what our expertise is. It's going out and actually really breaking down that job into what's called different tasks, so doing a task analysis. So with the scraper operator, it was everything from, there's controls above shoulder height that people are having to reach above shoulder height quite a bit, so that they need to be aware of that before they apply for that job. And when we gave a list of the physical requirements of the job, it came to about 20 different physical requirements in comparison to sitting all day and operating hand controls. So yeah, we come in right from the start of assessing each job.
So right from the start, as in you sit down with the HR team before a job's even advertised sometimes?
That's the ideal, and a lot of workplaces that have a whole system set up, they have, once they've got these task analysis done for each job, they actually have that on board, and it's sometimes termed a job dictionary, that they have a job dictionary for each job, and that breaks each job down into the specific components. So the ideal is for each job to have one of those job dictionaries.
Yep.
We sit down, we speak to the people doing the job, we take video footage, we take still photos, and basically have that thorough analysis of each job and provide the employers with a record of what every job involves.
And the reason I ask is I know we have a lot of HR people watching this as well as employers, and I really want to be able to set them up with some sort of framework of a system to follow. And if getting someone like yourself in before a job description is actually written, that's a really important part of the process. So thank you for sharing that first tip. So strategy number 1, just to recap, is to do a manual task risk assessment. Is there anything else that you want to share with us on that topic, Angela?
Yeah, well, I guess the task analysis itself isn't necessarily the risk assessment, so it's really just the explanation of the job, and from that, obviously, you can do a manual task risk assessment. So initially, it's really just saying what the job involves, but as part of that, employers might say, can you also do a risk assessment and actually identify what risks might be associated? So that's a good way to actually minimise the risk before the job description even goes out. So if things can be fixed up at that early stage, then yeah, that's the first step towards making it a safer workplace.
So what does a manual task risk assessment look like then?
Yeah, and there's a few different models around. We tend to use one called the Mantra, which is quite a simple one. And the reason we use that is employees can actually get involved in that, and I think it's really important for them to be involved. They do the job every day. They also seem to discuss some of the possible solutions. They talk about it because that's the job they do. And it really looks overall at the risks associated with each body part, so whether there's a high risk associated with neck injuries or a high risk associated with people sustaining shoulder injuries, and it just breaks each task down but also looks at each specific body part to see where the issues are. So.
Okay, that's good to know. That certainly gives us visual people something to visualise. Thank you, Angela. Yeah. So moving on to the second strategy, would you mind sharing the second strategy with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So pre-employment functional assessments are the next strategy, and that's an area that we're just continually being asked to do more and more of. Typically, a lot of workplaces have done pre-employment medical assessments, which really screen someone for any underlying medical conditions. What they're finding, though, is people may have no underlying medical conditions, but physically not actually be able to perform the job. We had an example of one guy who was young, fit, very healthy, had no medical problems, but when we did a functional assessment, he actually he didn't have the cardiovascular fitness to do what's a 3-minute step test. He also couldn't lift 20 kilos, and he had to lift 28 as part of his job. So from a medical assessment, he would have been cleared, but from a physical assessment and a functional assessment, he couldn't actually physically perform the role. So it's a big legal issue at the moment. People have to do these really well. There's some people who are doing generic functional assessments, but to stand up legally, they really have to be specific to the role that the person's going for. So if someone has to lift 20 kilos as part of their job, and that's the heaviest they'll ever have to lift, you can't rule them out by saying they can't lift 25 kilos or 30 kilos. If someone can't squat for long periods, you have to actually be able to prove that that's part of the job, that they have to be able to squat for long periods. So that's where that original task analysis comes in, of knowing the jobs really well and then performing these assessments to make sure the people you're employing can actually do the job from the start, rather than having someone get injured on the second day of their job because they physically can't actually do the job. Yep.
And accidents happen in, what you're really talking about is sort of out on site workplace assessments. Just to flip it over, if someone's working behind a computer for 12 hours a day as part of their job, is there as much risk in those sort of occupations as there is in out on site occupations, and is it the same process?
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably as much, if not more, risk sitting in an office. Our body actually prefers to move around and lift and carry and be a bit physical. We're certainly not designed to sit still, and these days with people doing more and more computer work, they really are sitting still for long periods of time. So again, we're just getting more and more call-outs to people who are having pain from sitting in an office. And I would think the stage with the office ergonomic stuff, it's really that preventative stuff again. So it's providing training and actually teaching people how to set their workstation up properly. We often get called into a workplace when someone's been there for 5 months and they just sat in the chair they had and sat with the computer at the height that it was, and suddenly they've got issues, and they might be 5 foot tall, and we find out the person before them was 6'2", sitting in the same workstation setup. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of training in trying to teach people how to actually set that up for themselves and make sure that they know from day one how to set themselves up. And then if they have issues, we can go out and hopefully identify what issues they may have and try and fix it for them.
Yep. So that's really good to know that it's not just for people that are out there on work sites. It's also for those of us that are in office, and it's just as important, if not, from what Angela was saying, even more important to make sure that these risk assessments and job descriptions and doing these pre-employment functional assessments is just as important. So thank you for bringing that up, Angela, because some of our listeners and watchers are in that sort of environment. So that's really good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and it is. And as I said, with more and more people sitting, the other thing is people that have done physical jobs that are coming in and sitting in an office, their body doesn't cope with the tolerance of having to sit for long periods. So, and again, with people going home and then sitting on iPads and playing computer games and watching TV, people's general muscle strength is deteriorating. So there's a lot of people with issues from sitting in an office.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So moving on to the third strategy to prevent injuries in the workplace, what's your third tip for the viewers?
Yeah, so it's actually doing manual task or manual handling training, or we sometimes refer to it as work method training. Typically all the research says that just training doesn't work, so you can't just train people to do things better and you'll reduce all your injuries, because you're still very reliant on human behaviour, very reliant on people doing the right thing in the right situation. So it's really important when we do training, we break it into the specific tasks people are doing. So again, that comes back to the original task analysis of knowing the job well, knowing what's involved, and then showing video footage of the actual task so that we can teach people the right way to do their specific tasks. But it's also teaching them problem-solving strategies, so that the tasks that we show them on the day may be for 4 or 5 tasks they do, but the next day they may be required to do something that's completely different. But it's teaching them the strategies to work out the best way to do each task, whether it's at work or at home. And just giving them some of those problem-solving abilities to be able to do things safely.
So does the training really have to be on a per-employee basis, or can it be done in a way that's across the board? Because from what you're talking about, it's quite a personalised thing. Is that correct?
No, very task-specific. So not personalised to the individual, okay, but specific to a task. So historically, a lot of people have done generic training, so they might go to a workplace, and we still get asked to do it. So a workplace I went to recently, they had people working in a range of different jobs that weren't even related, and they wanted generic manual handling training. But some people were doing very repetitive work with their hands, and other people were doing very physical, heavy lifting work with big boxes, and they're completely different tasks. So task-specific rather than individual-specific, but we then, as a component of training, we often actually get people to self-assess some of their individual characteristics, just to see where they may have personal risks that might impact on their ability to do a job. Yes. And that's really for them to have that self-awareness and be able to accommodate that when they're doing certain manual handling tasks.
And so just to cover the flow so far before we get on to topic number 4 is get the job description right, get someone like yourself involved in the job description, because it does need to be more task-based and task-orientated. Do a manual task risk assessment. Do a pre-employment functional assessment on the actual candidate for the job, and then do specific training for the task. Have I covered everything so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it does seem like I was on the wrong track before with it being more personalised. It's not personalised to the individual. It is more throughout the whole process. It's task specific. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And just because every task varies so much, and I know that, again, historically people have spoken about a long-distance truck driver and just categorised that into a job that everyone knows what a long-distance truck driver does, but it depends whether that person loads and unloads the truck, or whether they have gates they have to put up on the side of the truck, or whether they have curtains they have to open on the truck. And it's very different. People may travel for 4 hours, people may travel for 8 hours, and it really does need to be broken down into exactly what that person has to do. And when it comes to the pre-employment functional assessments, again, that's really important about thinking specifically what that person has to do. And some organisations will do an assessment just for a long-distance truck driver, which obviously really varies from workplace to workplace. So, yeah.
From your experience, just going back to the pre-employment functional assessment, do you recommend them to get, say, the last 3 viable candidates to do that assessment, or the person that, you know, they really want the job for and has already got the job?
It does depend on the workplace. It probably depends on how many applicants they have for the job as well. We often do them as almost the last point of call, so people have passed all the other employment requirements and then they're basically told. So often they're starting work even the next day or the day after. So when we do the assessments, we fax the paperwork through within half an hour or an hour. So it's really, they're sort of told, well, go and do this assessment. If you meet the physical requirements of the job, then, you know, the position is yours. That's how some workplaces work. We don't decide who gets the job and who doesn't. We let the employer know what the risk is of that person. So it may be that someone, their cardiovascular fitness is below average, but an employer may be willing to accept that and say, well, they'll increase that on the job, and we'll be aware of it as they start work, that maybe they need to improve their fitness over the first couple of months. So it's really the employer still has control over the recruitment process.
Yes. Yep. Okay, excellent. Now, would you mind sharing with us the last key strategy to preventing injury in the workplace?
Yep, and this one's probably the only one that's not really preventing injuries. I guess all of them so far are looking at preventing injuries. The last one is actually doing what we term as a suitable duties manual. It has a different name, I guess, in other workplaces, but this is if someone has been injured, and by doing that initial task analysis and having a thorough understanding of the job, it means if someone is injured at work and employers are having to find suitable duties or light duties or alternate duties, if they actually have that breakdown of each task, they can look at what duties might be suitable for someone while they're building up their strength or recovering from an injury when they come back to work. And that can be an expensive process for employers, and often we get called in because employers just don't know what someone should be doing and shouldn't be doing. So to have the tasks broken down, and it may be that a medical certificate says someone can't do above shoulder height work. If it's broken down, then they can actually type in above shoulder height work, and all the jobs that involve above shoulder height work can come up, and the employer knows that they can't get that person doing that particular task while they're still on restricted duties. So it just, again, gives the employer a bit more control, and is a less expensive process for them with the rehabilitation, because they can do things a lot more internally rather than relying on consultants to come in and help them with that process.
Okay, excellent. Now we've had a couple of questions come through and we are sort of getting close to time, so I'm just going to jump over to those if that's okay, Angela.
Yep.
One is, okay, so this is all pre-employment, so we really have focused today on what can be done pre-employment to prevent injury in the workplace, which is the ideal, but what should they be aware of or on the lookout for actually when they're doing a job?
When they're actually doing a job? Well, I guess, again, it comes down to the manual task risk assessment. So, again, and that should be an ongoing process that almost happens every day, that people should be aware of how to assess the risk of a task, and constantly being, I guess, aware of what the different risk factors are, and certainly if a risk is identified. And when we go out, the first thing we do is ask the employees themselves, what job do you find the hardest physically? And almost always that job is also the one that comes up as being a high-risk manual task. So it's really just that identification, and then once it's been identified, going through a process of trying to come up with possible solutions to reduce the risk of that injury. And it's really difficult to talk about, what the specific, I guess, strategies are for reducing the risk, because every job is so different and every risk that's identified is so different. So it does need to be very specific to the situation.
So what you're saying is that it needs to be, there needs to be a system and a process, and then the oddities throughout the day need to be assessed by the actual employer together. Is that correct?
Yeah, and with the help of a consultant, so that's what we typically go in for. So a lot of the workplaces that have a really good overall system will get us in, and often we're just acting as a bit of a guide to direct people in the way of how to identify the risks and even what possible control measures there may be to reduce the risk. But it's amazing how many times the employees and employers often come up with it themselves, and we certainly guide them and help them identify what the risks are. But yeah, it's certainly that involvement. It's sort of, there's a term called participative ergonomics at the moment, and it really is a matter of everybody involved in the job participating in it, including supervisors, managers, and then the people on the ground performing the job. So.
Because where does the line get drawn between personal responsibility for an employee going, this feels riskier, that this is not normally in my job description, and go to the employer versus the employer having the job description completed and finalised. But things at business is dynamic these days. Where is that fine line? Is it? Yeah, it's an interesting discussion.
It's a really tricky one. Yeah, it is. I mean, that opens up a completely other question. But even from an employee's point of view, they're able to refuse any task if they believe it's unsafe for them, or they believe that they're not able to perform it safely. Yes. When we're doing a task analysis, we will also pick up those jobs, and we let the employer know and say we don't actually agree with the way this is happening. It's a really high risk task, and you really probably should be looking at reducing the risk. And I've done that just recently at a workplace, and my job wasn't actually to do risk assessments. It was to assess the job for the purpose of training, but my response was I can't train anyone to do that particular task safely.
Yes.
The employees were still doing it, but really they still have the right to say, I don't believe I can do that safely, and I'm not going to do it. So
it's an interesting can of worms, isn't it?
Absolutely. Another half an hour.
Perhaps that'll be another session. So I'll invite Shane back in if he wants to unmute himself, if he's got his Wi-Fi connection sorted. Otherwise, we will start to wrap up for the day. So there were some really good, solid things for employers in this session on preventing injury in the workplace very proactively rather than reactively, and I think that's what Angela's demonstrated really, really well. I believe Shane's back online. So Shane, would you mind sharing with us your thoughts on the session today?
Yeah, look, I just want to thank Angela for coming along. I guess it's a sharp reminder to go back and consider the tasks that we're asking people to do. Look, we're guilty in our office of just getting a couple of chairs from the local office work store and sitting them at the desk without really thinking too hard about how monitors are positioned and heights of desks and some of those sorts of things. So I've got a half a page of notes here just to go and do some in-house ergonomic studies and assessments. So thanks for the reminder, Angela. As I said, we get so wrapped up in what we're doing we forget about those things and then wonder why we get tight shoulders and sore eyes at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yoga helps me, Angela. I don't know about your thoughts on that, but that helps me after a 14-hour day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Angela from Wise Therapy, for dropping in and sharing that with us all today. Angela, would you mind just recapping on what you've discussed today and tell us where to go to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, right from the start, the message was the biggest thing is not just ticking the box with workplace health and safety and meeting what you need to do through legislation. It's really thinking about how to make it a safe workplace. And having an overall system is certainly the best way to go. And by really knowing your tasks, knowing the jobs, assessing them for the risks and trying to reduce the risks, doing pre-employment functional assessments, which I really would emphasise because it means you get the right people for the job. And then doing training, so whether it's office ergonomics training or manual handling training, depending on the job, but again, making it task-specific and workplace-specific. And then obviously if people are getting injured, it's having the resources on hand to help you with the return to work program and I guess, reduce the need to have to call in consultants to help you every time someone gets injured. So, yeah.
Excellent. And where can we find you, Angela?
So our business is called Wise Therapy. So the website is just www.wisetherapy, W-I-S-E, therapy.com.au.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being such a brilliant and informative guest today. For those of you that have watched, thank you for being with us for our second last live Lunch and Learn session for 2013. Thank you, Shane from OTrain, for hosting today, co-hosting. He didn't have the best internet connection today, so that's fine. He will join us again in 2 weeks. On the 10th of December, we'll be having Troy Morgan from Vision Health and PT, who will be talking to us about creating a healthy work culture. So that'll be a really good one to finalise the year. So thanks everyone, have a great 2 weeks, and we'll see you back here on the 10th of December. Thanks, bye.